outside we see blue sky, green trees and all that in Austria, but at the same time we see destroyed nature and a lot of environmental problems everywhere but in the West. We believe that the West enjoys good environmental standards, and it also enjoys the benefits that it gets by the fact that others don't respect environmental standards, because that makes production cheaper and consumption cheaper in the West. We believe that the West therefore causes much of what's happening to the environment, and we believe that this needs to stop. I will show you our model and how our model is the only way to actually achieve our goal. I will then show you why the West should actually care and why it is essentially good for everybody in the end. Okay, so at the moment, there are already, by, for example, private companies, NGOs, or something like that, lots of efforts in order to improve environmental or social standards. We believe that those efforts have not seen much of success, just because no single actor in this entire conglomerate of production and consumption can actually change the entire system. For example, a single manager has limited power to change something because he's bound by what all the stakeholders tell him to do. No single, for example, no single government in a state, for example, like Bangladesh or Cambodia or something like that, can essentially really make dramatic changes, because every producing state is in a sort of competition with all the other states. For example, Cambodia and Vietnam are competitors, and every state has an incentive to attract investors, and this is mainly done by lowering environmental standards. No sub-central municipality or something like that can essentially change that because of the same competitive mechanisms, and no subcontractor in the chain of production can change something, because there will be somebody else who will apply lower standards and thus get, for example, somebody tells them to produce and will earn money by that. Also, consumers in the West do not want to change anything by that, because I mean there are efforts in the direction of good consumption, but most people don't really think about what they buy, especially young people. They like new clothing, and this is not of primary concern. We have already tried in changing that by educating consumers. We've seen it doesn't work. We believe we need a new measure. What we are going to do as a proposition is essentially what the motion tells us. I'll take you in a minute. We hold all companies accountable to the environmental standards that apply in one country. This is to say that everybody, for example, an NGO or somebody, can accuse a company of wrongdoing. We will try to examine what's happening. We'll try to prosecute them. We'll have to pay them, but they don't have to pay fines. We believe that there's not much to be disputed about it. If you have your eye, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Would you agree that some amount of pollution is necessary for the development of a nation? And if so, how exactly do you measure? How do you set the standards?
I believe that those standards have to be negotiated, and well, we do have some amount of pollution in, for example, in Western countries as well. The question is, what amount of pollution? And we believe that we have that a consensus already here in the West. And we are, in this motion, primarily talking about goods that are to be produced for the West. We don't hold any country, any company accountable who is, for example, doing something just for the rest of non-Western countries. So we have, for example, industry that is essential for a non-Western country, but it's not operating in the West. They are still free to destroy their own country if they have the feeling, or if a democratic government has the feeling they need to do this in order to advance. We believe, though, that every company that produces for the West, and so the West reaps the benefits of this production, needs to be held accountable by the same standards that do apply here. Why should the West care, and why do we believe that the West has the right to do this? In terms of environment, we sort of believe in universal standards. We believe that, for example, if you're talking about social standards, every country or every people has the right to decide what are appropriate social standards, or what is the minimum wage in a country. But environmental standards are sort of universal to the extent that, for example, those environmental standards are part of the production chain that is done for Western sold products. We believe that environment more or less affects everybody. For example, think of climate change. It is actually a problem that does also affect the West, if not directly, then indirectly, because the West has to be solidaric to countries, for example, that suffer from environmental damages. We see that with Australia and climate refugees that Australia has to be careful. So the West has an inherent interest to take care of environmental things. And lastly, as I already told you, we reap the benefits of what is happening there, and we believe this needs to stop.
Sir.
No, thank you very much. We believe that this policy more or less helps everybody. What is actually happening is that prices here in the West will rise. So yes, Western consumers will have to pay more. We believe that in most cases the demand for products is more or less inelastic. For example, we all need some products. We believe in those areas where they're not. Those are fast consumption goods like clothes, like I don't know, a cell phone every 2 months. We believe that's not necessary. So we believe in those areas it's okay that there will be maybe less demand. We believe overall people will still buy the product. The Western people are rich enough to pay for that. So local workers will benefit because they don't have to work in dirty conditions. We see that problem, for example, in India and Bangladesh, where they really have a problem with work pollution. People who drink the water there locally. If rivers are polluted, if seas are polluted, that really harms those people who have the least power to change something like that. We believe that the one who has more power, has the duty to help those who don't have the power. We believe it will help future generations because our Earth is limited, and we believe that those resources are limited, and the good environmental state is limited. And we believe that we have a duty for future generations to uphold it. And we also believe that, yeah, that's actually what we believe, and we believe that's pretty convincing. Thank you very much.
I thank the speaker very much for that speech, and now I invite the leader of the opposition to open the case, the opening opposition.
The problem that we have with the case of side proposition here is not that we don't think that there should be any environmental standards whatsoever. It's not that we think that the West has no responsibility on what's going on. It is, though, that we think that we do not have to hold the West to the same standards as we hold all the developing countries, especially when it happens in these cases that have to do with the West. We think that this will cause major harms which have not been dealt with by side proposition. I'm going to show you 3 things today. I'm going to show you why the standards of environmental is so high in the West. I'm going to give you 2 rationales for this, and I'm going to show you why this doesn't happen when you do it to the developing countries. I'm going to show you why when we try to enforce this, we're going to cause much less good than harm than we're going to do. And third of all, I'm going to show you that even if we don't do anything, then some standard is going to be kept, and it's going to be a good one, and we can enforce some kind of standard, it's just not the one that they want to stand for. First, a couple points of extraneous rebuttal. When he said that what standards we have, he concedes that some standards are needed in general, some are going to happen anyways. He says that the only thing that his answer to my partner's POI is that the West reaps some of the profits from this, and therefore we want to have the West reliable for whatever happens there. But here he doesn't make the right comparative, right? Because what he says now is that we're going to enforce the same standards that we have when the West produces other products for the West. We're going to have the same thing happen when it happens in the developing countries, right? This means that In this case, we have some profit from the developing countries, right? They get their jobs, they get advanced, they get all kinds of things I'm going to talk to you about. And what they need to show is that when they pay for this, they pay the same amount as the Western people, the developing countries do the same as well. And then when he says that, okay, we have universal standards, right, and it affects everybody, he's exactly conceding the point that it is already in our incentive to take care of these things, right? Because it affects ours. I'm going to give you a few more reasons why this is going to happen in my third point as well. So, first of all, why we set the standard so high in the developed world, right? Because what these environmental standards are, it's like kind of like a trade-off between the present and the future. We are willing to pay some taxes, we are willing to cut carbon emission, we're willing to cut pollution, we're willing to do all kinds of things now, so tomorrow will be a better world. Now, it's a completely fine thing, and we think that we should do this. Just we think that the amount that this should be done, right? The amount of trade-off should be done differently with people depending on their state right now. Because now, if we live a healthy life, if we get to life expectancy of 80 years or 75 years, if we sleep comfortably on our bed, it is much easier for us to cut on the quality of our life today, right? Because we can give up many things which are like luxury today. However, people who make a lot less money, who die a lot more than at childbirth, who have less accessibility to roads and all this, every cut that they make in their quality of life is much, much more harmful to them. Therefore, we think it is not fair by that standard. But even we can give you another standard, right? And that is the accountability for the state of the environment today. And we think that the reason, right, that we got to such a bad state, right, where the temperatures are higher, we have climate change and everything has happened, is especially because of the developed countries, right? Because they have all these people that are working in this case, because we have like factories which are so big. Now, this is already at the expense of the people in the developing country, right? And they're taxed twice. First of all, they're taxed by these people being like the slaves, the people who are being taken advantage of working in these factories in the first place. Secondly, they're the ones where the factories are, who are suffering these environmental changes. And now what you're doing is you're going to take their jobs in addition to this, and therefore you have like double and triple jeopardy punishing these people again and again and again for things that didn't happen there. So, and like this, like all the Kyoto committee, like the reason why they didn't change that is because it affects these people so much. Before I get to my second point, I'll take over.
Why should they lose their jobs if there's still simply a market for these products, and no matter in what country you produce, everyone needs to keep to the standard? Perfect.
Okay, nice second point. Exactly. Okay, we think this is going to cause businesses to close, and it's going to harm these countries within these countries, and it's going to harm the developed countries as well. Why? First of all, enforcing these standards is very hard. Why? Because we have factories spread up geographically in various places. Because we have bureaucracy of different countries. Because the governments of these countries are not just like in the developed world, right? We have people who can't take, who aren't in charge of as much as we have like in our like Western country. Because we have many people in many different places. Because it's hard to communicate within these things. Because every change within every factory has to be accounted for from the big factory. It's a lot of changes that cost a lot of money. What this means is that the marginal profit sinks from every one of these companies. It means that it'll cost us more to produce in these places. It means that especially in like competitive businesses, especially in small businesses, it's going to be hard to develop these places. It's going to be we're going to have less jobs over there. We're going to have like less profit margins. We're going to have people pay more for each product. Secondly, it means that it is probable that the alternative for the people within these countries is going to be either not to have any job at all, okay, because they have unemployment in these places, or to have jobs which are worse off because they wouldn't have gone to work in this place in the first place if they had a better alternative, right? Okay, so they might be working in the field, they might be working much harder than they would have done otherwise. No, thank you. Okay, now we're gonna say we have more unemployment, we have more people, less people working there. That means we're gonna have less social mobility, okay, because the people who work in these places are gonna have a lot less ways to advance in life. They're going to have like less maybe English or maybe like other languages which they learn when they work in these places. They're going to have less experience in working in these factories, maybe working in other factories they can get other ways. We have less people emulating what they see in these factories to create their own factories within these places. They have less people that work in surrounding businesses for these businesses, right? Because if you have a business over there, you might want to have like some kind of hubs which give them like all the things that they need. They might need like some some crude materials, they might need some other things which these businesses give. They give them the big businesses hubs, and this hurt these people a lot. And of course it hurts the people in the developed countries because we have like more expensive things and everybody pays more for these things, okay? Why we say in the third point, okay, that we want to have like we're going to have some standards anyways. Because if we don't do anything, these companies already have incentive to change that. First of all, it's because what they said in opening government, right? Because it affects our economy, our environment as well. Second of all, because we want to say, if it comes out that the people, something like horrific is happening, right? Something awful, people don't have water to drink at all. If that goes to the press, and the press knows that this company had this happening because of it, like McDonald's like caused like tens of kids to die because in this village because this happened, this would be horrible for McDonald's. They would want to change that immediately. Third of all, they don't want this to happen at all, right? Because it's these workers, it's these places that they might work, like they want to have like more businesses working for them later, more factories in more places. They have all the incentive to change it already, and even if they didn't, we can set some lower standard as the West. It just doesn't have to be the standard that they stand for. So for all these reasons, we beg you to oppose.
I thank the speaker very much for that speech. Now the Prime Minister can continue the case for the opening government.
Madam Chairperson, different countries at different stages of development need different standards. But that's why we're not changing the standards of the whole country, but only the standards of the production chain for these companies who are working in the West and who are selling in the West. That means that all the local companies who just work locally, produce locally, sell locally, in these countries, they're simply their own industries, etc. They do not have to adhere to our standards, of course, and thus are producing way cheaper than all their international competitors. That means that we will still have probably about the same costs for products for the local people. We have an advantage for the companies in their country, which means probably that also there are probably advantages in terms of taxes and the development within the country if the whole industry and if the whole markets are not dominated by firms who come from the outside. So we leave them on that overall this is a pretty great benefit. Then we simply do not think that no one will produce anymore in these countries, because the low environmental standards are only one reason why multinationals produce in low standards in poorer countries. The most important one, normally apart from that, is simply the low labor cost, which will still remain the same, of course. We might say that is sad, but simply this will be the case if we only talk about environmental cost here. Some different regulations not adhering to the environment will simply be not as strict as well. Simply the way you have to build up your factory with less work safety, and all of these things are still huge advantages these poorer countries have towards the richer ones with a more expensive workforce. And that's really simply because most of these products simply have to be produced still, and this adheres to all countries for all companies that want to sell in the West. That simply there will not be a great change here. So pretty much all the harms we've heard from opening opposition simply do not work out because the jobs stay, and the higher cost which simply comes from these higher standards, we believe that of course it will be transferred to the West, because these companies, I mean, for them it's more expensive. They have to take for their production some company who now spends more money, so they have to pay them more money, and we believe this cost will simply brought over to Western consumers, which is basically where these costs belong. So this problem is not here. Then they believe that in the status quo, the companies simply want to change anyway. And I mean, yes, there are some companies and there are some consumers who are really interested. We have the fair phone and that kind of stuff. But overall, there's still a very, very tiny market share. And it's at the moment, yes, there are press releases that some companies are doing bad stuff, but that doesn't really work simply because there's something like diffusion of of responsibility, which means that all these companies can basically say, no, it's not our fault. We didn't know about it. It was someone else in the production chain somewhere. And now we say, no, you are at the top. It's your duty to know everything that's going on here, and you have to do it. But before that, simply, we have so many news about so many things that consumers basically do not care enough about it. And so in the status quo we have a very slow change about a few people, but we believe this is so important. It's about the lives of the people in the producing countries here, about their environment and about the global climate, of course, that we need to act way faster than that. I think Nikos already brought to you why this is the only option how we get out of these competition, which basically drives the standards down, and so how we will get to change. I will also now talk about the further effects on the on simply how the industries, etc. work over there and the problems that we will change. And this is what I already brought in the beginning, that we give multinational companies a disadvantage compared to local ones, which is a huge problem in the status quo. Because right now, even if they are producing the same product, there is a huge advantage within the multinational companies, simply because either they're, on the one hand, they're producing on a larger scale and are cheaper, but mainly they have different ways to finance themselves. They can subsidize their company that tries to sell something in Uganda with money they make in a different country. And so they can push their competitors out of the market. Simply, they have all that money from different markets which they can put into this country until no local force is there anymore. But now, even with these advantages they may have, that they have, maybe can bring some higher educated people from the outside if they want. They have some better technology. But overall, we believe that the cost of standards is quite substantive, and that so overall the local companies will have more money. And sadly, money and simply market share, especially in poorer countries, correlates directly also to political power. I will talk about that in a second after your POI.
Okay. We're not saying that jobs will go to the West. We're just saying that they won't open there in the developing countries in the first place, since we showed you 5 different reasons about how expensive it is to enforce all these standards in these places in the first place, right? This wasn't rebutted at all.
Jobs moving to the West and not being there in the first hand is pretty much the exactly same argument, and I believe my rebuttal holds for both cases. Anyway, so political problems. We have, in many cases, I mean, in the past it was way more extreme. For example, with these, well, they were called banana states. The United company, something company, which from the United States, which was producing in Panama and some of these countries, and basically this company held a fourth of the whole workforce of the country, which means it has huge political influence anyway, because it can simply always go to the politicians and say, either you change the standards how we want it, either you do these laws for us, or we will move out of the country. This is a huge problem. It's always a problem if one company has that much power. It's even a greater problem if that country doesn't have an inherent interest in this country because it comes from an outside and just uses this country as a cheap source for labor and the source and the place in the earth to get dirty. Oh God, my English. So if we do this whole thing, which weakens these international companies, we believe that that there will be local companies, and we believe there should also be smaller companies, simply because no one single company has this huge advantage that the multinationals have right now at the moment. So this will move some of the political power towards the people of the country, because once there are no huge outside players that can influence politics, it's more probable that democracy itself will work, so that the people in the country can have their will for their politicians. And we believe this is a great benefit overall. So what have we brought you from first proposition? We believe that if we say here, in this specific country, that these specific set of rules are what we want for our people, then by this we say these rules are good overall. Thus, other people should have these rules as well. We believe it will work that they get these rules, because simply it's no problem for them, because we will pay it. Our consumers will pay it overall. We believe that this is the only option that we have for change, because every single actor has an incentive to keep the standards low, and we need to change that.
I thank the speaker very much for the speech, and now invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to close the first half.
Ready? Okay, so I think the previous speaker doesn't really engage with the analysis brought to you by my partner. Why is that? Several reasons. First thing, he answers us that, well, they're not trying to apply the standard of the West on the local businesses in these developing nations. That's never what we claimed. What we claim on our side of the house is that we will in fact now, we will say that this proposal actually works for the local businesses. Why is that? We prove to you why necessarily you will get less of these factories, less of these corporations' operations in the developing nations, meaning the smaller local industries that evolve around each factory, for example, to supply, for example, lunch for the people working in this factory will no longer exist because there will be no big main factory that creates a demand for these small businesses. So that was not answered. Second thing, please notice he talks a lot about, in general proposition, talk a lot about the West's responsibility. We think that that's like not exactly on the clash in this debate. Why is that? Because as opposition, we said that, well, we might agree that we agree that there is some amount of responsibility, but the fact that there is some amount of responsibility never proves to us that never proves that you actually have to have the same standards as the West in these nations. It just proves that you need to have some sort of standardization, right? Third thing we tell you, we actually explain why we think that there already today you have incentives to have these standards, okay? Guess what? Part of the analysis was actually brought to you by the previous speaker and by the first speaker, by the Prime Minister, and the previous speaker didn't really engage with my partner's point of that. What did we tell you on this? We tell you that first thing, like they said, since environmental issues can actually affect the Western world as well, right? Pollution spreads, water pollution, air pollution, it spreads around. And the hole in the ozone layer, for example, that's something that affects all of us, global warming, etc. Meaning already today we have it in something, even if we don't care about the people living in developing nations, we care about ourselves and our own families, right? So at the very base, we care about these issues as well as a company. But my partner gives you two more reasons to that. First of all, he tells you the idea of media coverage, because the moment that you hear that some company, some factory is now polluting the environment in a way that now people don't have water to drink or don't have the ability to breathe any sort of clean air, that creates a huge of a backlash in the West, because the West actually cares, like they themselves said, that we are willing to pay a bit more maybe for some things. So we're saying this media coverage is actually a huge incentive for us to take care of the local environment. Last thing we tell you, if you want to have manpower that will actually work in these factories, you need to make sure that they can actually live around the factories and, you know, basically live. And if they don't have water and clean water, if they don't have clean air and they cannot actually live in these areas, meaning you don't have people working in your factories, meaning, well, you're shooting yourself in the leg. So companies have the incentive to take care, to some extent, of the environment issues around these factories. Again, we don't think we were properly engaged with this. Third thing I want to talk to you about this disadvantage, right? The advantage that these huge corporations have versus the small local businesses. We're telling you, A, these corporations are actually helping these developing nations. Why is that? Because in order for you to be a developing nation, for you to actually develop, you need to make sure you have trade. You need to make sure I'll take you in a second, okay? You need to make sure you have contact with other countries around you. You need to make sure that you're producing something. We're saying that without the help of these external companies coming into the developing nations, all these processes will never happen. The local small business in a developing nation will never have the power to shift its goods to other countries out there. That's why we need the corporations coming in. We prove to you that the local businesses are getting hurt, so we don't think that this stands. Before I continue, I will engage with closing.
Yeah, certain countries will still have the same resources they have today, and the labor will still be cheaper in countries in which that companies conduct their businesses today. Is that enough reasons for that companies to stay in that country?
No, because we think that the labor is not enough. Why is that? Again, analysis that was not engaged by my partner, but let me expand on this issue as well. Let's talk about why these criteria, when we're talking about setting notice, not any sort of standard, but the Western standard. This is huge money we're talking about. Why does this mean? And my partner talks to you about geography, my partner talks to you about different bureaucracy, and was not engaged. I am telling you that the infrastructure that is necessary. We'll tell you that in order to meet the standard of the West, some factories will now have to rebuild from the base, because you need to make sure that your air, that the pollution from your chimneys is now going extremely far away and not in the local area. We mean that the draining system, okay, the sewer system of the company needs to be of the factory needs to be changed so it won't go into the lake. This is building from the foundations. More than we tell you, don't have the right people over there to actually conduct the inspections and the engineers to build this from the start. Meaning you have to now transfer people for this change. We're saying this is a huge amount of money. And when we talk about every step of the process, something that's even when you talk about a factory, a local factory in this developing nation, that creates a very small part of the end product that we are talking about. Meaning, if this is such a small part, a lot of times it will be much more beneficial for me as a company to actually close down this factory and, you know, in another factory start making this part. Maybe even not use manpower to do it, but to go through a mechanization process and now have machines build this process. This de facto means less factories for people to work in, less factories, and in the factories that exist, less working place for the people from this area. This is why we're telling you it's a pretty bad idea if now these companies have to suffer these amounts of expenses. So we're saying the fact that there is cheap labor there is not enough, because you can always cut back even on labor, okay? Because if you don't want to now spend even the salary that you're paying to these people, if you want to cut down, and because people also demand some sort of safety regulations, etc. So we're saying these are all things that company can cut down on if they decide to transfer to a mechanical system in a different factory. You know what? Maybe not even a developing nation, but this kind of factory, a new factory that's going to create this part in a mechanical way with that machine and not people, you can also have back in the Western world. So again, less jobs, less opportunities for the developing nation. Let's sum up what we just heard, what's going on in this debate. Basically, we asked opening proposition for a clear criteria. How do we measure? Where do we set the line? We never received one. They agreed with us that development involves in pollution, and they never actually proved to us why you need specifically the Western standard for this. We showed you why there are incentives today to make sure that the damage is not that bad. We showed you why if you try to implement these ideas, you have to create a huge backlash that will only hurt the local people that you're trying to protect on their side of the house. So in general, we believe that this motion is a very bad idea, and we're so proud to oppose.
I thank that speaker and the first two teams, and invite the member of the government to extend the case to the government side.
They're trying to present us here the case that when we impose these standards, all multinational corporations will actually live somewhere and vanish somewhere, and we don't know where. Well, those multinational corporations actually produce something and they need resources for it. And resources for some products can be found only in some countries. And we believe that they cannot just easily leave that country because not all resources, such as oil, for example, can be found anywhere. Second of all, why they not leave? Because they already have built infrastructure, and it's much more easier for them only to upgrade that infrastructure than to remove whole infrastructure in another country. We believe that it produces much bigger costs for them. About cheap labor, well, if anything can be replaced by machines, and if it will be cheaper for those multinational corporations, they would already have done it, because we believe that their main interest is profit. For standards, well, we believe that we should try to impose West standards and make them universal. And we believe that actually if the standards of the West is too high for those corporations, we believe that they will not just passively watch it happen. They actually can lobby and can influence to actually find some balance in those standards, so they can actually meet in the middle. Okay, and about incentives for those companies that they already now have incentive to do it well of the media coverage. Well, we believe we don't see much change in status quo now when we have all those media coverage, and we believe that also there is a sort of collective action problem where not one country can start first to impose those standards. We believe that they just criticize each other, but nobody will actually do some concrete action. And we believe that local governments are also weak, and we believe that is why the West is the right character to do this. Okay, we believe that this will lead to strengthening the local governments and to raise standards in the whole country, in the whole developing country. We believe that West must do this because local governments are already too weak, because they cannot fight with multinational corporations alone. And we believe that consequences that those corporations are doing for their country are irreversible and are very, very damaging to those countries. So we believe that actually we as the West have to do when we solve the problems with multinational corporations in those countries, which cause main problem for those governments because they cannot fight them. Well, we believe that we will strengthen those governments, that they can actually focus on when we remove the competition from multinational corporations that are now threatening to leave if we impose any standards with them. They can then focus on whole standards in the whole country and other local companies that they cannot control now because they have constant threat of multinational corporation that is doing the whole thing for much cheaper money, that is taking jobs, and they cannot be controlled anyhow. And we believe it is better because now the government has a sort of support from the West, and they believe that actually West is helping them. So they will feel actually empowered to face consequences that actually environmental damages are doing to their country. When they don't have to deal with such influential players as multinational companies, they now have power to actually raise those standards and to impose them even to other companies in their country by just replicating the model that the West has already imposed. And we believe that actually
Okay, producing today is worthwhile for these companies. Producing tomorrow, if all these changes will be necessary, we explained to you why they will be so expensive, it will not be worthwhile today. That's why probably these manufacturers will move back to the West, for example, or will just shut down or become smaller.
Okay, we already explained you that for some of this multinational corporation, we don't leave much choice with this. They will have to respect it because they have nowhere to go. Because in the West, there is already all the resources are drained out or they don't exist, and they already have established infrastructure and cheap labor in those countries, and we believe that they strongly incentivize them to stay there, and actually because they actually don't have much choice, and they will have to accept these policies. No, thank you. Okay, we believe that the West in those developing countries are often seen as someone who doesn't care and who actually never do anything to help to lower the power of those multinational corporations. And we believe that that is why the people of those developing countries are often very hostile to anything that West imposes. And we believe that this is how actually West increases their image in those countries, because it shows that it cares for those. It shows that it cares for those workers there and for the country that exploits. And we believe that this will raise awareness of how environment is actually important in those developing countries. They will have to they will understand that it is an important question, and we believe that governments themselves will be able to impose further environmental standards in that country, and we believe that even supports for those measures will increase because we now see that people actually people actually see that West is doing something to actually help their country. So we explained to you why these multinational corporations don't have much choice in that they will have to actually change the way they act in those countries, and the perception of that country and the government of that country, the people of that country will actually change, because we see now that West is actually doing something, and we believe that it will lead to further increase of environmental standards in those countries. Thank you.
I thank the speaker very much for that speech, and now invite the member of the opposition to open the case for the closing of that position.
Mr. Speaker, we believe that the accountability for climate change in the status quo should be held by the West, and it's wrong for us to force this burden on these developing nations and take away investment from them. I'm going to extend on 3 points. First of all, I'll talk about how this mechanism excludes non-Western businesses from global markets and actually lowers environmental standards in these countries. Secondly, I'll talk about accountability for climate change and how this motion will be perceived by these countries. And thirdly, I'll talk about investment costs and how this takes investment from those who most need it. I'll start with some rebuttal. So this idea of like, okay, well, once you've settled in this developing economy, you won't leave. Like, firstly, these are multinationals. These are the countries that are the most mobile globally. It's the easiest for them to change. And if they realize that by like putting a lot of money into moving back to, for example, Europe right now makes sense, then they are able to do that. They most likely have already like infrastructure set up in these countries as well. This is not just about like investments that we're currently making, right? This is also about the future. Like, for example, there's a lot of new democracies in Africa that have huge potential for growth and are currently growing. Like, so these are like even more important, like in our opinion, to invest in that than the ones that we are currently investing in, and this is where they benefit the most. Also, like this idea of, okay, this environment is important for the developing countries too. Like, okay, we agree, but we don't believe the burden should be on them. We believe it should be firstly and foremost on us. We believe it's easiest for the West to decrease its emissions because we have more access to technology. Also, like, we believe we can improve the conditions in these countries over time, like making concessions, being reasonable, and we should like take the burden, considering we've been historically oppressing these countries and they're preventing them from developing, so that's kind of on us, right? Firstly, how this excludes non-Western businesses from global markets, right? So, firstly, this prevents the development of the local economy in that the rise of countries to welfare, such as, let's say, the astronomical rise of South Korea from an incredibly poor country into an economic giant, is often through like having these local businesses that become multinationals and break into the Western market over time, right? And we are also talking about these companies, right? So like when these are because like they start exporting into countries where their products are paid for more because they are competitive, because they have lower labor costs, etc. So like, if you make it difficult for these companies to compete on the global market, because if they would want to sell, let's say, their phones to Germany, they would need to comply with like standards that they can't reach, and that would raise their prices, so that they would no longer be competitive. Then those companies won't be able to grow in a way that would enable these countries to become exporters in the future. And that is horrible and unjustified, because we believe they should have the same chance that we historically did. Secondly, there's a lot of local companies that don't necessarily become multinationals, but that compete, cooperate with multinationals, such as subcontractors. And you're also excluding them from getting investment and getting work. And we believe that unreasonably favors large companies as well as developed economies. So that's bad. Furthermore, you decrease incentives for these countries and these companies in these countries to develop their environmental standards. Right? Because in the status quo, often they already have the mentality where having jobs, having economic development, being able to feed your family is more important than having clean air, right? And we think that is something that should be legitimate for them to decide on their own, right? We cannot say for them that they should rather keep our seas clean rather than bring food to their family, have access to medical care, education, etc., right? That's really illegitimate. But also, if we try to force these unreasonable standards, we're more likely to start trading with Russia. We're more likely to start trading with China, which don't care about these standards as much and that don't have technology, for example, that they can contribute to these economies so that they can become greener faster. They also may stay in the local market because countries such as India have a huge local market and they might just stay there, right? So firstly, because they have no contact with the West, and they don't have these investments, they have less incentive in the first place. Because it's so often from West that you hear that, okay, maybe it might be a nice idea to have a green economy after all. But secondly, we're less able to develop it. Because these standards tend to come through technology. And technology is expensive and not easy to access. So we will ultimately have less control over helping these countries develop their standards, and they may well pollute more. Second point, accountability for climate change. So first of all, how will this be perceived? So we're demanding these sovereign nations to basically operate on decisions that we have made because we want to be greener now that we have 3 planets, right? We believe that's fairly ridiculous. We believe that we are the ones that are truly accountable for climate change. We have an industrial revolution where we caused huge pollution historically. But also, in the status quo, we have reckless overconsumption, and it is over-demand that has effectively created these problems, even in these countries. And these developing economies are already getting greener way faster than we did in the past. For example, China is the largest investor in renewable energy in the status quo. So we don't believe it's reasonable for us to say that they should comply to all of our standards when they're trying way harder than we did, right? So this will be perceived, especially in the context of the exclusion of the global south, as a battle scale.
The rise of less polluting technologies within these countries will lead to way lower costs in their health systems. Doesn't that counter the potential loss of a few jobs?
The thing is, we have that on our side as well. We will be bringing that technology over, but that requires us to go there in the first place, which we have on our side, right? But furthermore, when we see that Western countries have huge tariffs on these, when World Bank loans have usually restrictive conditions, this will be perceived as exclusion of those economies while favoring ours. It also has impact on the local consumer market because many daily goods that people in these countries consume are actually made by multinationals. They import food, they import medicine, which we talked about. So that means that when multinationals have a steep increase in their environmental standards, the prices of these consumer goods in these markets will go up. And as the analysis of the first stop already explained, a lot of people will be losing their jobs. So that you will have less money and you will need to spend more money to get food, get medical care, etc., which will lead to even worse social issues in these countries. Thirdly, this excludes the worst countries that need it most, because it's the hardest part is overseeing and enforcing, right? For example, the shipping industry is hugely uncontrolled, and if you're going to a country without infrastructure and without the strong institutions, you won't be able to build those from ground up as an initial investment is too much, which means we will be going less to the markets that need us the most. So, oppose.
should now invite the government witness to close the case of the government.
I'll sum up this debate in 3 main points. First, I'll explain to you why the status quo isn't changing fast enough today, and why that wouldn't happen without this measure. Second thing, where that factories and multinational corporations will conduct their businesses in the future, and more about the balance between environmental and development. And the rebuttal will be incorporated in that point. Flashes, however. First, we heard why the things are not changing today fast enough. That the poorer countries are in position to compete between each other to have lower and lower standards, and if they try to change something themselves, they are afraid that they will lose that multinational corporation. And in the moment when you're putting people in the position to choose between their jobs and to choose between environment, in that moment that people are really afraid and can't do anything. The people in that countries feel that they are not powerful enough to compete between such a huge multinational corporations, and we never have consensus between that countries. We never had a consensus between that countries to try to change something together, and we don't see that it is possible to happen now, and we believe that this is the faster and the best model for us to do this. Why is that so? When you move that pressure from that countries to compete for the multinational corporations, in the moment when you're not need to compete between other countries which are in the same position and afraid that we will lose that corporations because you're trying to change something. In that moment, the people in that countries will feel that they can do something to change, to systematically change things in their country, and to introduce standards which they don't have today. Because in that moment, when they're not afraid that they will lose such a huge amount of jobs and of productions, which of the multinational corporations, that will be easier for them to change standards and to do something about their standards and introduce them, and even for the smaller and to fight against the smaller companies. It will be easier for them to introduce their standards, because we are moving the huge pressure from them.
Okay. Once the developing countries become developed, then they can impose the Western standards by themselves and sustainably. We showed you extensive analysis why implementing this motion will greatly reduce the chance of these countries developing in the first place.
This is exactly in my second and third point, and I'll explain why that happened. First, the huge part of your analysis is based on the fact that multinational companies are mystically disappear, and they still need to conduct their businesses somewhere. And I will give you a few reasons why they wouldn't move from that countries. First. When we talk about that branches of production which causing the most effects on the environment, they are highly dependent usually of the resources Yeah, some countries will still have resources. You wouldn't have oil in Western countries because simply that most of their resources are based in other countries, or iron, or when we talk about other things. Second thing, also transport costs are very important when we talk about that, and this is something what multinational corporations using calculus when they decide where they will conduct their businesses. Also, building the factory, usually that branches causing the high starting investment to start your business, and it is not that easy to move your production simply. That will also cost them very much to move their businesses to other countries. And also we say that the labor in that countries will still be cheaper than it is in the West, and all that are reasons why that factories wouldn't simply move to West countries and let that people without their jobs. And the second thing, when we talk about, we don't say that environment is all the time the most important thing. We are also care about development. But what we say is that it is not fair to base the level of development and prices and everything you want to have in Western countries to base on the fact that you are simply living off environment in poor countries. We simply say, if we believe that some standard is too high and that it is causing so high costs for some product, we simply say that market will solve that. If people in the West believe, but in that moment we should use in calculus all the costs which we are causing to other countries. This is not fair of us to base our standards and cost of our products on the fact that we are destroying some other countries. And also they said that that wouldn't be good for development of that countries because the food the prices will be higher. There we say sometimes maybe the prices will be higher, but what we say is that under the current situations we are unreversible destroying the environment in that countries and making them unavailable maybe to produce their own food in the future and to produce some other things. And we say that also that are the things which are very important. And because we believe that this is the only way to make some changes fast enough in that countries is to introduce this measure we beg you to propose.
Thank the speaker very much for that speech, and now I invite the opposition whip to close the entire.
Thank you for the floor. Everyone in this House agrees that climate change is a huge problem that has to be tackled, but on the opposition side we think this should not be done at the expense of the development of the third world. First I will talk about the effects of this policy on the most vulnerable countries, developing industrializing countries in the West, and then I'll talk about Western accountability and how we would actually enforce change. So, as my partner has explained, this plan will lead to the exclusion of the most vulnerable countries from the market that they are heavily reliant on. If you look at countries that are highly dependent on huge multinational corporations, have one or two industries that they are reliant on, or a couple of companies that they rely on and are heavily export oriented, they will be in deep trouble because of this plan. Because if you think about the environmental standards that will have to be enforced, it's going to require a lot of like overseeing and implementing by the companies, and it's going to require a lot of resources and time because these countries don't have the infrastructure or the institutions to like support this kind of plan, which will lead to these companies go to other countries. I know that the government side has said that they're not that easy to leave, but everybody has seen what's happened to like first big companies were in China and then they moved to Bangladesh because labor is cheaper there. It's very easy for them to move and they have the resources, so that's likely to happen. And even if there are countries that are poor and vulnerable and where the companies are still going to stay, the harms are huge because like first of all, if you have cooperating companies that like work with these multinational corporations, you say that local workers will benefit from these standards. Like multinational corporations are incentivized to have like pure water and like not horrible conditions for their workers. Like that is the base standard that already exists. But this is like a much higher standard that the West is able to uphold, but it's going to be a huge burden on these countries, and therefore it's going to create huge losses because it's very expensive to enforce these standards on these countries, and therefore there's going to be a loss of jobs, more poverty in these countries that really need those companies to be there and really need that development in there. Second of all, like you talk about how like supporting like local companies will still exist. Well, like they are highly dependent on these bigger companies, so there will still be a loss of resources and a loss of jobs in these countries. So basically, you're just fucking everyone over in there, and we think that's horrible. So. And to the second group. So, if you look at like fast developing industrializing countries, like BRICS countries, for example, or Korea, they are developing their economy, and they're not doing it based on the environmental standards that we uphold, because there's a huge divide in values based on like whether you appreciate growth or like whether you want to like uphold environmental standards. The West has been doing the same that these countries have been doing in the past. When you look at Industrial Revolution, for example, like we have grown to this point by exploiting the environment hugely, and therefore these countries think that it's unfair if they need to uphold the same standards, even though they haven't reached the same level of development themselves. So that is highly hypocritical of them. So what you're going to end up having is like companies from these countries not entering the Western market because it's much easier and cheaper for them to stay in, for example, China or Russia or India, where they have like huge local domestic markets where they can like well develop and like get bigger and expand without entering the Western markets. And this is bad for the environment, not only for the Western markets but also the environment, because there is, as I've said, there's a huge disparity between like the value of like environmental standards and growth, and these companies are not going to be incentivized to uphold environmental standards that they would have to uphold if they entered the Western market. So it's much less likely for them to have like any kind of regulation on environment in this sense. So it's very harmful for the environment, especially because these countries are huge and they're growing, and they're gonna like exceed the like businesses of the West really soon. So the impact is going to be huge. Yes, I'll take you.
First, our under model, no one is forcing other countries to introduce standards which we have, which Western countries have today. It only applies to the multinational corporations. Another thing, do you think that also can be beneficial for their domestic companies? You don't need immediately to have the standards which need Western companies to.
Multinational companies don't only exist in West. There's like huge companies that come from China, for example, or from Russia, that are not incentivized by having like huge costs from this plan to enter those markets. So they're going to be just fine if we're going to say this to them. Okay, and secondly, if you have smaller companies in these countries or in the like less industrialized countries, then they are going to be de-incentivized to cooperate with the West, because they won't be able to have a chance to like go to that market because it's going to be so expensive for them, and we think this is deeply harmful. Thirdly, if you look at the West, the government side has been trying to say how like we're gonna have better image in the third world because we appreciate, like we're gonna appreciate their environment and have like better life for their future generations. No, this is not what's happening. We're like taking away the base of their economy by bringing up standards that they cannot uphold, and this is going to be a huge shot in their economy that they're not going to be able to take, and it's horrible, and you cannot frame it like that because that's completely untrue. so basically you're like facilitating a clear conscience for the Western consumers. They're like, oh yeah, we're getting these nice green products because everyone's upholding the standards, when you're actually just like having the developing countries suffer. You're painting a completely false picture here. So, second of all, about Western accountability and facilitating change. So, we all agree that West is like, at this point, we have done the worst to the environment of like the whole world if you look at different regions. Like, we are largely responsible for the state that the world is in right now. But then the government says that the right way to go on about this guilt is to like regulate the markets that have not reached the same level of development, and like somehow in that way do service to them by having a better world because we're gonna have a cleaner environment or whatever. Like, no, that's not how this works. You're not allowing the same path of development you had yourself for the rest of the world, which is like completely not justified and harmful to the relations of these countries and to the environment as well, because as I've shown you, many companies will not be holding onto these regulations themselves. So, because this policy is deeply harmful to the West, to the non-Western companies and the most vulnerable countries in the world, and because we think the West should be accountable for the mistakes they made themselves, please oppose.